Welcome back to part 2 of Annotating Carol Ann Duffy's Before You Were Mine. I've already done the first 2 stanzas, so I'm going to do the second 2 for this video. So as you can see, this is the annotation that we have so far, and if you watch part 1, we talked about how the mum was rebellious and fun and was quite social and was always going out and so on. And in this stanza, let's get straight to it. So at the beginning of the second stanza, it reiterates the same idea, which was that at the beginning it talks about how here I'm 10 years away from the corner, whereas here it again reiterates that same time frame. So the decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one, eh? Actually I'll use blue to kind of mix things up a little bit. In fact I'll go with a different colour totally. Let's go with green. The decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one, eh? So again, talking about the time before when the mother was having fun. Now for me, I don't know when this is, I assume it's the 20s, so maybe she'd had the poet Carol Ann Duffy in her 30s, but again she talks about how she is loud and possessive and yelling. So all of this is quite demanding and will clearly change the freedom that the mother had had. And I talked about the colloquial nature of the expression, and you have words like a here and also till, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and there might be more as well. She calls her sweetheart as well. So I find it to be quite affectionate, the use of the colloquial language, not colloquial but informal language. I remember my hands, again we've got that first person focus. I remember my hands in those high-heeled red shoes. Have an image here. Again, you don't often, I would argue, see your parents wearing heels like this. I don't think there are any negative connotations, but it's perhaps for a younger person, maybe someone trying to attract someone else. And then she uses the word relics, which I think is a really interesting word. And a relic is something that has survived from an earlier age. So this is kind of making her mum out to seem ancient to a degree, or at least that part of her life is over. It's almost like an exhibit in a museum. I think that's a fairly negative point in terms of, I've talked about how the poet seems to at times be gloating about how she has changed her mother's life, and this for me is an example of that, the word relic there. And now your ghost, this is supported by words like ghost, clatters, and again clatters refers to the high heels. I don't think it's a positive description of someone walking. If someone clatters towards you, it suggests they're ungainly, perhaps suggests she's not comfortable in the high heels. And now your ghost clatters toward me over George Square. And George Square is a particular place in Glasgow. Till I see you, clear as scent under the tree. Now this line for me is quite ambiguous. And I know students always want clear answers when the poem's been annotated, but I don't have the answers all the time. I want you to think about what you think this means. But certainly she talks about her mum in the past tense as a ghost, wearing shoes that are relics. And then she says, I see you, clear as scent. That is an interesting confusion of senses here. Some people refer to that as synesthesia. But there's no point listing these clever terms unless you talk about the effects. What's the effect of seeing her mum as clear as scent? There's certainly a clear memory evoked here. So I'll put strong memory evoked. She's talked about remembering her hands in those high heels. So as well as seeing images of her mother that she's using as an inspiration to think about how she used to be, is it stimulating memory as well for her? Under the tree. And they talked about the lights here, so you imagine it may be a Christmas tree. And whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart? So instead of being disgusted, which is a kind of more modern approach to viewing your parents being not sexually active but romantically active, she calls her sweetheart. She finds it endearing that her mother would have been having love bites when she was younger. Whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart? So it's quite, although I've said there's some negativity, I think it's quite sweet the way in which she views her mother. Let's look in a bit more detail at the last stanza. Then you have this reference here, cha-cha-cha. Everyone watches Strictly Come Dancing, Strictly Ballroom. Anyway, that program on BBC One, I don't watch it. But if you do, you know that the cha-cha-cha is a South American Latin even dance. And it's associated with passion. And the exclamation mark, cha-cha-cha, emphasises that aspect of her mother's character. And then it says, you teach me the steps on the way home from Mass. So this interesting juxtaposition with this kind of fiery, maybe sexual dance, juxtaposed with coming home from quite a solemn occasion, going to church, being reverent and worshipping God. It shows that the mother perhaps has this more responsible side, if you see that as responsible, but in between that, or even when she's going home, she's teaching them these kind of fun steps. So this fun part of her never has died. Stamping stars, the alliteration here. I recently went to Poetry Live, and Carol Ann Duffy was talking about how the stamping stars was the sparks from the metal heels that her mother wore. Stamping stars from the wrong pavement. And that's interesting there, because it makes you think that perhaps the fact that this mother is dancing after Mass is not natural for her. She's doing it on the wrong pavement, perhaps. That's what that could mean. It could also mean she's out of place. She's moved. This is Edinburgh, before it was Glasgow. But then some interesting lines here as well. Even then, the narrator wants the bold girl winking in Portobello. So there's clearly a longing here for that side of her mother. She wants to know that person. Somewhere in Scotland before I was born. And this last line, I think, is a key line in summarising what the poem's central message is about. It says, that glamorous love lasts. So she reiterates how glamorous she finds her mum. That glamorous love lasts where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you were mine. And the repetition of the ands there is kind of that child-like listing, which I think betrays how, again, I use that word, she lionises her mother, how she sees her mother. She sees so many positives to her character. So I think that's enough. You want to think about the structure as well, the use of enjambment, the rhyme scheme, the syllabic structure, but I won't cover that because I think those are aspects of the poem that you could go into more detail yourself. But when I finished annotating this poem, I did want to think about what its central ideas are. That's always the most important thing. So you may want to pause the video in a minute and think about this. Is this poem about the narrator admiring her mother, the narrator trying to get to know her mother more intimately in order to strengthen their bond? Is this poem about Carol Ann Duffy thinking about every aspect of her mother and how she used to be in order to feel like she's getting to know her better? Or this one here, is the narrator gloating about how she has put a stop to her mother's freedom and fun? That would be more of a negative point. Or is it about the narrator coming to terms with the idea that there are aspects of her mother's character that she will never be able to access? Is it all of these? You think about this, pause the video, discuss it with someone. What do your mum or dad think? But yeah, that's something you can think about, certainly. I have links to part 1. Ignore the central ideas bit here. Here and other videos here. These are keywords that I think are important. Again, romanticise, glamour, nostalgia, lionise, exuberant, rebellious, wistful. If it's useful, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up. I really hope so. See you next time.